Okay, good morning. It's great to be here in Edmonton. I feel invigorated. We need this kind of weather in Toronto. I just want to thank the Center for Children, Family, Community Research for having this important conference dealing with a range of matters, and I especially want to thank Amy and Shannon for coordinating the speakers and helping accommodate everything. Especially following Dr. Miller's presentation, as I talk about keeping our children out of gangs, there's a 100% correlation between gang members and anxiety. Every gang member, so I just want to thank you for that. And people always say all these activities I've done and letters after my name, it really is because I actually have ADHD, and you could actually talk to Dr. Hammond about that with resiliency initiatives, because that's probably one of the best strategies for helping kids get out of gangs if they do get into them, or even preventing kids from getting into them. But in terms of some context for my presentation, I'm going to basically just talk a little bit about a background overview of children and youth gangs. Basically, what can we do if we think that gangs are perhaps enticing or luring our children? Which children are most at risk in some gang prevention 101? You know, obviously, in the media over recent years, maybe the last decade, we've really seen some of the personal impact stories of children caught in the crossfire of gang activity. Recently here in Alberta, the story of Asia Saddleback, who you're familiar with. And you can see some of the ages here. Ephraim Brown, aged 11, Jordan Manners, 15, Jane Creba, many of you probably heard about that story from 2005 and the year of the gun in Toronto, going back to Brianna Davey as well in 1999. But as we hear about these stories, one of the things that, you know, it resonates with parents and with us as community folk is that could have been my child. And because media tends to take those personal stories and make them so pronounced. But the reality is that it's pretty rare for a child in Canada to be caught in the crossfire. What is perhaps more common is for children as young as 6, 7, and 8 years old, approaching the tween years, to get lured into gang activity. And I'll speak to that. I don't want to create a history. I want to say that gang involvement and gang activity in our country is not an epidemic. It's not as widespread a problem in terms of its prevalence or incidence as it is in the United States. I'll get to that in a second. But what we have to look at are things like peer pressure, racism, teacher insensitivity, domestic violence, teen pregnancy, bullying, mental health. And these are the antecedents that young people who I speak to all across Canada tell me are bigger issues for them than the threats of gangs. So as we move into the second part, quickly into my presentation, just the difference between gangs and other groups, definitions, number of gangs, and who are in gangs, and some of those demographics. In terms of identifying what's the difference between groups and gangs, gangs are basically thought of where violence is prevalent, intimidation, colors, clothing. They're an organized or informal group. There's these, quote, secret codes or hand signals, hazing, rituals, and facial expressions, competition, blood, mainly young males, weapons, lots of money, and issues of sex or sexuality. So that being said, are any of these gangs? My question to you, would any of you want your children being any of these groups? You can see there's a bunch of really scary guys, scaring what appears to be an innocent lady on the ground. The village people. Do any of you want your children being a part of them? The other gentlemen are a group of actors. Again, police and just peaceful demonstrators in Toronto's Queen's Park. The violence we see in some sports. And then, of course, who can forget Twisted Sister? They're pretty scary. This picture freaks out a lot of children, causes them great anxiety. Obviously, this is a very scary gang for young people. There you have hand signals there, and their leader is George Bush. But how do the police and researchers define a gang? A group of 3 or more people who are formally or informally organized to pursue some form of criminal activity. Gang members self-identify, and that's where we have to be careful in Canada. We don't want to tell kids who are just exhibiting bad behavior, they're in a gang because they'll believe it, but that's something we could talk about another time. Identified by police or identified by research. Interestingly, it's a definition that is not applied equally in Canada. I know I got a friend of mine who has a young teenage boy, there's about 6 or 7 of them, and at night they get 5 or 6 of their friends, and they go through the neighborhood and take ornaments on people's lawns, like, you know, those little frogs and Christmas Santas, and put them in people's trees. Now, that's technically a crime, it's mischief. It's a misdemeanor. However, you know, when I said, well, you know, your kids are in a gang, the parents said, no, they're not. So it's all a matter of perception, right? So how many gang members are across Canada? Well, this is a bit of a moving target. But what I really want to share with you is that, again, it's not as a pandemic epidemic the way it's portrayed in the media. The reality is that the United States has 10 times the population of Canada, but it has twice as many gang-infested areas compared to Canada, yet Canada has twice the landmass, as we know. I guess that just says gangs don't like cold weather. But there's 50 times more gangs in the USA than in Canada. There's 100 times more gang members in the US than Canada. These stats come from the National Crime Prevention's website, which I will share from you at the end as well. And the population density of gang members in the United States is 11 times higher than in Canada. So it's 2.75 per thousand compared to 0.24 per thousand in Canada. This is a bunch of numbers. These slides will be up on the website. But what I do want to point out that's relevant here is that close to 1 in 10 kids in gangs across Canada who are involved are under the age of 16, and that has implications for the teen years, especially as we're looking at how gangs get recruited in terms of playgrounds, which I'll address in a second. Some ethnic demographics: 25% African Canadian, 21% of gang members are First Nations, about 18% Caucasian, again from the National Crime Prevention. And then just some prevalence, obviously Ontario has the most active gang members as identified by the Canadian Police Survey. The Centre for Criminology at University of Toronto, again, looks at 6% of high school students reported being in a current gang, and 5% said they were a former member of a gang. So again, you're 10% of kids. And 70% of active gang members were born in Canada. And 14 is the mean age for gang involvement, while 10 was the minimum age for gang members interviewed. Now, that was in this study. The kids that I've worked with across Canada have gotten engaged in gang activity as young as 6, 7, and 8. So what are some important points? The RCMP states that youth gangs are not just an urban phenomenon. They are active across the country in both large and small communities. Other things I want to point out: they do cross income strata, so they're low income and high income. I was a middle-class kid growing up in Vancouver, and I was in a gang and did some pretty brutal things from the ages of 12 to 14, 15. So they cross race and ethnicity, they cross gender, generally ages 6 to 28, but beyond, and they do cross religious and non-religious spectrums. Some of you might have heard that we had the Toronto 18 who were formed out of a mosque. Right? When I was in Vancouver, I was growing up in a church, but some of our church kids were in a gang. Pretty scary, eh? So gang members can look like anyone. People say, you know, what do they look like? You know, which one of these could look like a gang? And the reality is any one of those could be a gang. Again, as young as 6. This is called playground recruitment. How do these kids get lured in? Money, candy, sense of family, missing love in their family, sense of identity, promises being made to them of engagement or manipulation, sex for some of the older kids, concert tickets, music, they connect around music, rebellion against their parents, excitement, fantasy. As we look at things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we see that a lot of the reasons why kids would perhaps get in a gang is because of the dysfunctionality of trying to achieve some of what, you know, many of you understand as Maslow's, the physiological needs, the safety needs, needs of love and belonging, needs of esteem, and needs of self-actualization. It's just a dysfunctional way of actualizing these needs as identified by historic Maslow. When kids do get involved in gangs, starts in the tween years and goes primarily through adolescence. But again, these are, as Erickson identifies in his crisis of stages of psychosocial development, those ages between 5 and adolescence, right? When inferiority and identity are an industry are so important, and that's when we have a lot of kids seeking an identity, and if it's not perhaps found in the home, they find it in their peer group, and sometimes their peer group may be engaged in dysfunctional behaviors such as gang activity. So which children are most at risk? Basically, my premise is that all children are at risk by the virtue that they're impressionable. All children need love, acceptance, friendship, security, identity, and some of them want money, but really what they're saying is when they want money, because money is actually a very low motivator, they really are talking about they want choice, affirmation, and opportunity. That's what a lot of kids are looking for. So why do kids join gangs? Excuse me one sec. Well, many kids join gangs for a sense of identity. And these are what I've talked to probably hundreds of gang members. I just came from Halifax. I dealt with 100 young people just there over the last 4 days. They're bored. There's perhaps barriers to sports and recreation. I often say, you know, if a kid can't afford, or a child cannot afford to play hockey or play football, well, their playing field may be their neighborhood. And if they don't have a hockey stick or a football or a tennis racket, you know, they may pick a dysfunctional or counterproductive, or not hockey stick, for example, of choice, or a baseball bat, and use it in a dysfunctional way. Family problems, family breakdown, visions of fantasy, a fantasy about being in a gang. They also have romantic views of gang life. Again, money, choice. Media influence is huge. In Toronto, we have a whole what's called a BET culture, where young people look at BET and they get this image in their head of what a gang is and they act it out. That's why one of the things I say is that we don't really have a lot of kids who are gang members in Canada. We have kids who are wannabe because they wouldn't survive a day in Chicago or in East LA, Canadian young people. Furthermore, American kids who are in gangs wouldn't survive a day in Mogadishu. So everything becomes relative. Love, acceptance, intimacy, security, sex, these are just, again, affirmations, Erickson and Maslow's models. A lot of kids, why are you in a gang? Because they can't even tell me. Some of them have maybe limited cognitive processing. We heard about that. You know, they're driven by their emotional drives versus maybe some of their frontal lobe functions. I work a lot in the field right now of acquired brain injury and mild traumatic brain injury, and what we've seen in terms of involuntary client populations in youth justice facilities is that as potentially as high, we definitely know 30% of young people in custody have an undiagnosed brain injury, but it could be as high as 60%, and that's pretty scary. So these kids, we're basically putting kids in jail who need to get treatment. So what can parents and family members do? Obviously, prevention is better than cure. What can a parent look for? We should, if that being said, if a kid isn't in a gang, what kind of signs can you look for? And what are perhaps, and perhaps there's some good news in terms of stages of gang involvement, because the reality is that when kids do flirt with that, it's basically about 1 in 5 who do flirt with gang activity. 1 in 10 may be in a gang of kids across the country. However, the earlier the intervention, the better the opportunity, and earlier intervention can actually occur because of where kids are in terms of stages. I'll get in that in a second. But what can a parent do if they suspect their child is in a gang or that their child is involved in gang activity? For me, I worked with a lot of kids in gangs, obviously across this country, and it's really about communication. It's that simple. It's communicating with kids. Kids want to be talked to. A lot of people, I heard a speaker yesterday say that, you know, kids want structure. They want to test adults. You know, it's not that they're pushing back, but what a lot of young people say is, you know, it's not my fault that the adults or my parents or my teachers cave into me. They're saying, you know, you guys should know better. So, you know, so the fact that when you turn your back on us is just showing us you don't care. So I would encourage any one of us. I think, is there anybody in this room who was never an adolescent? It's just go back on your own experience and remember, you know, kind of what you were like or your friends were like, and it says a lot. We want it to be communicated with. We want it to be heard. Love and affection. Wayne Hammond said to me, there's nothing better than, you know, just giving a kid a hug or a pat on the back. Unfortunately, in some school systems now, you can't do that anymore because of certain protocols. But another thing is you have to know your children's friends, right? Know where your children are and who they're with. Not because you're being invasive, right? But do it in a cool way. Allow your child to invite you in to share that with you. Talk about gangs with your children. Address the myths and the realities. I'll give you some resources for that in a short moment. Support positive opportunities with your children. You know, a lot of kids say, I want a job. Gang young people say, I want a job, but they don't know how to do a resume. Engage them. For those young people who can't get involved in sports and recreation, you don't have to wait to be a part of some organized sports. You can just play in the backyard or do it within your own park, except outside in the winter. You can do it inside a community center. Faith involvement, family time. Again, you know, in productive ways. But one point I want to say is that what I've seen is a high correlation that everything begins at home when gang members are involved. Okay, and that's something just that we have to keep our eye on. In terms of signs of gang involvement, I say look at the ABC, affect, behavior, cognition. Again, I want to say there's a 100% correlation between gang members and anxiety. Every gang member I know is probably depressed. I know they're all anxious, and they're all paranoid. Behavior, you know, they stay out late. A lot of people wonder, well, you know, what do gang members do? They generally sleep through the day. They sleep until, well, those ones who aren't in school, sleep until 3 o'clock, get up and do their stuff from 3 till 6 and 7 and 8 o'clock, generally 3 till 8. That's, if you heard Dr. Kim yesterday, she mentioned that's when a lot of activity and criminal behavior of young people occur. That's the reality, because gang members are waiting for after school to recruit a lot of the kids on the playgrounds. And you look at young people's attitudes and their thinking, and again, this is it's manifest in what they say, what they do, how they act. The reality is a lot of young people, especially tweens, aren't very good at hiding their emotions. They wear their emotions on their sleeves. They express their behaviors and they show their identities. And the reason is because a lot of young people, they're not as manipulative as they think, or as we think they may be, as we think they may be, or as they think they are. They're not covert operatives, right? My kid's a covert operative, you know. So. A great sign, if your kid has a gun under their pillow, or a knife in their pocket in their closet, they're probably flirting with gang behavior. If your young person is 12 years old and has $1,000, like, you know, they're probably dealing drugs. And, you know, parents come to me, my kid had $1,000, what's going on in their pocket? I said, they're probably in a gang. Oh, right? So, and that's a reality. It's that overt. They're not very good at hiding stuff. It's amazing. I remember when I was 14 years old or 12, I used to just leave my marijuana on my desk in my room. My mom found it, and she goes, what is this? I said, it's parsley for salad, Mom. She believed me. Explicit verbal expressions, and again, hand signs. You know, if somebody's driving out the front, you see the kid doing a hand sign. What was that? What was that little hand sign? You know, now kids use when they're chatting on the internet all this language that we don't know. Again, you know, it's just a new way of doing things. So, what are some specific signs? Clothing they may wear. Colors, again, there's resources that you could identify what kinds of clothing, but I want to be careful to, you know, not say that we're going to stereotype them. Language, hand signs, it's a combination of these things. Media choices, music that they may be listening to, hardcore rap, right, 50 Cent, flirting with that kind of stuff. There's a lot of white kids who are acting like the stereotypical inner-city African-Canadian kids, right? Well, what's going on there? You know, just explore that. Absence from homes and wake-up sleep cycles. So I want to reiterate, however, though, that a lot of the stereotypical kids in the inner-city, African-Canadian kids in Toronto actually aren't in gangs. They're just mimicking what they see on TV, and then the white kids are actually mimicking them, but they're thinking they're in gangs. So it's a kind of a weird kind of cycle. Friends and peer pressure choices, background, and the backgrounds. You should know the backgrounds of your children's friends, right? Well, what kind of family are they from? I'm saying you don't like stigmatize, but you know, maybe you have to reach out to one of your child's friends who's struggling at home. Performance in school. Some of their behavior, isolation, secrecy from the family. Maybe they're using drugs. If your child is coming home with red eyes and going and eating all the tuna, you know that there may be an issue. Wads of cash in the pockets, and especially mental health, undiagnosed mental health. A lot of kids who are in gangs are suffering from anxiety. I talked about, like I said, I talked to about 100 kids in Halifax just a few days ago. 10% of those kids is suffering from an anxiety issue. How do I know? I asked them. I said, put up your hand if you have like some kind of concern with your own mental health, and they put up their hand. I said, put up your hand if you haven't been treated for it, or nobody's intervened with you. They put up their hand. I built a level of trust with them before they did that, but just to see that that's pretty pervasive. 10% is very significant. Okay, so again, it's observing your kids or our children, and sharing lovingly in communication with them. This is probably one of the best preventative measures we can have in terms of looking. So what's some of the good news? Again, I had mentioned that, we need not say our kid is, going to fall into a gang or got lured into a gang. A lot of kids get involved in gangs because, as I had mentioned earlier, in terms of a fantasy stage. They have some idealistic view about it. It's been shaped by media. They hear it in the news. They want to be cool. And then there's the at-risk stage. These are basically developed by Constable Scott Mills out of Toronto Police, who heads up part of their TIPS program. And in these two stages, it's pretty easy to really intervene with kids from pulling them out or not getting involved. That's as high as 80% of those 10% of kids. So, it's not this, it's not going to be this, it's a loss of a child of getting involved in a gang. The hardcore stage does become more difficult, but that also comes at later ages. So we can see that the tween years is very important for prevention and for reality checks and for showing love and positive communication. So this is important to understand. So again, it's not that we have this mass epidemic of gang activity across our country here in Canada. It's very, very different than the States. And we have to not buy into it. And we just, quite frankly, have to use the resources of organizations like the Alberta Centre for Child, Family and Community Research to just be positive and work in loving ways with our kids, and use organizations like resiliency initiatives to use some of the strategies to develop good character traits with young people. One of the things I want to do is give you a few takeaways. I'm not going to go through what's on all of these websites, but these slides will be available through the website. But right across Canada, gang activity and prevention takes different forms depending on which province you live, because as Canada is very flat, it's very different. I work with gangs in Vancouver, Manitoba, done stuff in Alberta, in Toronto, Halifax, and it's very, very different. The communities are very different. So there are tweakings across Canada. National Crime Prevention has some kind of cross-Canada information. The website is there. The link is there. You just need to click on it once you go to the slides. Calgary, Edmonton. Again, in Edmonton, you've inherited some of our Somalian gang problem. Okay, that was imported from Somalia through Toronto to Edmonton, I would say. Calgary perhaps is a little bit different. Vancouver, again, when I grew up, there was a lot of Asian gangs that was active. My gang was more of when I was a kid, was a very kind of a multicultural gang made of Aboriginal kids. Me, who was kind of like a Heinz 57 mix, some white kids. But in Manitoba, it tends to be a lot of Aboriginal gangs. I should mention, I'm doing a lot of work with South Asian gangs now in Vancouver. Toronto, again, has a whole span of gang activity, and there's less gang activity, let's say, in Nova Scotia, although it does have somewhat of a smaller prevalence rate there. So these are just some of the websites that you can go to for more information, depending on where you're from in Canada, or whoever's looking on the internet, where you're located, in terms of some more support. And those resources are applicable to both parents, stakeholder groups such as schools, research centers, and kids. So I just want to thank you for my time today. I didn't want to make sure I want to burn up all my time. One thing I do want to say is, if any of you want to know more a little bit about my story, I didn't really want to share it as much, but if you look at the Vancouver Sun, Google my name, Vancouver Sun, and you'll see why I'm this gang expert. It's not because I really know a lot, it's because I talk to other kids and because I lived it. And so that's basically why I do what I do, to try and help encourage folk like yourself and people who are watching to look for the signs, but understand it's really about love and communication that will help our kids not get lured and enticed into those gang lifestyles. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. We have an opportunity, about 5 minutes, for some questions. Oh, one at the back right there, I see.
Hi. I just wanted to know about gender prevalences in this gang relationship. Are you seeing a real big difference between gangs and girls and gangs and boys?
Yeah, and so I did skim by that in one of the slides, and basically it's just under 10%. Most gang members are about it's not about 94% male dominated according to National Crime Prevention. So that would be about 6% across the country in terms of female involvement. But however, in some provinces like I believe BC, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, it's around 10% of girl involvement. Okay, but that's generally where it's at. And those are the numbers that are observable by research and by police. So those again, statistics are things that, you know, it's hard to pin it down, but the best research that we do have, national crime prevention studies through a range of community-based stakeholders in the police, it's about 90% male, about 10% female.
Thank you. Question over here. Oh, and we've got one over there. Let's start over here. The mic's closer, and then we'll come back to you, Sandy.
Thank you. I am a youth development coordinator, and I work in the Abbotsfield community here in Edmonton, in Northeast Edmonton. And we do after-school programs teaching the children life skills. And one of the areas that we touch is gang awareness and prevention with our children. But you had mentioned, you know, like maybe having your child in sports and rec and family time, know their friends, everything begins at home. In our community that we work in, there are a lot of single mothers who work 2 jobs, don't have a lot of time for their children, can't afford the sports and rec. So in that event, what do you suggest? Because we only have a limited amount of time with these children, so you know we don't necessarily know all of their friends and what they're up to, those kinds of things. So is there any suggestions for us to be able to do our jobs better?
Yeah. All of the gang members that I know, the majority of them, probably 99%, and including myself, came out of single-parent families. And a lot of times, some people may think, you know, do we criticize that? Any family structure where love is prevalent is a good family structure, whether it's a lone parent or 2 parents. I know a lot of families that have 2 parents and the kids don't feel very loved. So it can't be about the fact that you're saying, well, it's just a single-parent family and you know, or a lack of resources. Money is never a substitution for love, and having 1 or 2 and having 2 bad parents versus having 1 good parent is not a substitution. Coming out of Halifax, I saw a lot of success stories, and one of the things that was said is all of those success stories came out of families of single parents. I think we all have to do the best that we have with what we have, with what we got. There's a saying, you know, it is what it is, now we just do it. Right? So I think that it becomes how did they navigate that in Halifax on Saturday mornings? Those single parents, when they had their day off, would engage with their young people and have that dialogue. They would try to look for ways to work with our community. We've heard the expression, it takes a village to take a child, raise a child, or a community to raise a child. And that's where we have to have the support structures that are broader, just beyond the family unit, so that, you know, if you have rotating, it's almost like a block parent kind of thing. If you have a rotating kind of parent who can say, well, I'll take this day, you take that day, and just engage with kids, so that because kids want to be felt that we're paying attention to them, right? So the reality is, yes, and that doesn't necessarily take money or resources, right? Engagement, just to sit and talk and share stories or you know, explain to what video games they're playing. That doesn't necessarily take money. It just takes time. And time is a commodity, a valuable commodity, so it does take effort. But to beat ourselves over the head and say, you know, we're doing the best that we can and we're out there working a double day, that's the reality. But we have to just look for those ways of having wider social supports around us and expanding our social social support networks with our community. And that's the model that we use in successful gang exiting projects in Toronto, and that's what they use in Halifax. Okay.
Great. Over here.
I wonder if you could tell me, what are some of the internal dynamics of a gang that keeps them, the young people, as being members? Like, what does a gang offer to keep them in there? Could you speak a bit more to that, please?
One quick thing, a lot of kids who are in gangs will say, if they didn't like their situation at home, they will hate it in a gang. A lot of people, so it's a lie, right? They get sucked into a lie. If it's strict at home, it's stricter in the gang. And not only will they come down on you hard in the gang, they'll actually kill you if you try to leave sometimes, right? Or maim you in some way. But why they get into gangs, again, it goes back to things like, where's their identity? Some kids are bored. If we just look at the basic psychological models of Maslow or Erickson, it gives us a whole range of why kids want to be involved in that gang. For love, for affirmation, for identity, for money, or just because. I don't know if any of you have ever said, to a young person, why are you doing that? And the kid goes, I don't know, right? So why do kids get in? They obviously are getting some need filled, and that's really enough of a reason as to why they're in it. What we have to do is look for reasons to give them other reasons not to get engaged in that negative behavior and activity.
Amy, do we have any questions from anyone on the webcast? We have time for one more question. No? One more question from the room, over in that corner over there.
Hello. I'm a social worker from the Hobima community, and we have a lot of children in care that come into our care for protection. But sometimes when they AWOL, they get into crime activity, and at 18 they end up in the prison system. I'm wondering, other than just being caregiver for children at risk, what else can we do in our community? Because I know our leadership has taken the stance to take our community back. Like they always say, it takes a community to raise a child. And there's a lot of fear in the community. Is there any steps on a website other than trying to bond together and not live in fear that we can do to prevent our 9-year-olds entering? Just for a lot of them are recruited even in grade 2 to sell drugs.
I have met leadership from Hobima, and I have to say that some of the intervention strategies that are being pursued, for example, in that specific community and First Nations communities across Canada, as well as some of the Black communities across the country, are positive. Restorative justice circles, healing circles. It really becomes about isolating those gang members or prospective gang members and holding them accountable at a one-to-one level, but through a message of love and affirmation in terms of what their identity is. I think that's because one of the things you have to be careful of is once they get into a group, even if it's 2 or 3, then young people will start feeding off each other. But the minute that you can get them alone and just have that conversation with them, that can really help to change that attitude. And I think the wisdom and the elders of some of the leadership, and I do know that the Hobima community has a very low median age group, but there still tends to be the older more mature folk of the community versus the younger one, and it seems like there's a big disconnect there, and that's probably what one of the bigger challenges is. But if what you can do, and I know there are some police officers who come from the reserve who are there, but to get them to engage in a positive way and mentor those kids. One-to-one mentorship is probably one of the most strategic things that you can do in your community, and to share the ownership of your own community with your youth.
I know, comment that there have been a lot of talk about restorative justice and healing circles, going back to the cultural way of healing our community. But there seems to be one big gang there that the IP have recruited for the sale of their drugs. And then we hear there's colors, then we hear all these weapons and all the children in care that are at risk, especially the Saddleback girl there. There are also wannabe gangs, and the whole reserve seems to be fighting for the drug sale. So I'm not sure they upped our police force and everything. I'm not sure how, like they have a 10 o'clock curfew where this fire alarm goes off at 10 o'clock, and I'm not sure what else we can do. There's a lot of education, a lot of healing going on, but
I will tell you one secret. Young men gang members they're afraid of older women. And so,
Right on.
and so what you can do is, if you got an 18 or 20-year-old kid, just walk up to them and put your arm around them, and no matter what negative activity they're being engaged with, they will kind of freeze for a moment. So I think you really, I know it worked with me, but with a lot of the young kids I see, there's something that there is an opportunity, especially for the older female leadership of the community, to have those dialogues with some of the young men, because they're not going to react in the same way that they might maybe to a male figure at that point, especially because it does tend to be very maternal in terms of the governance. So I think, again, I can go on and on about the whole economic and the drivers and drug prevention. It's not going to work. But what I found is it is really, and I know it sounds cliche, but it's about communication, it's about love, it's about one child at a time, and it is about doing exactly what you're doing, right? But by all means, don't live in fear, because the gangs tend to feed off of that. And so if you live off of that, it's going to perpetuate it. So be positive, show communication, show love, and just keep doing the good work that you're doing, but you will win children back one child at a time.
Relationships, relationships, relationships.
Yeah, I heard that before.
Yeah. Please join me in thanking Dr. Hutchinson so much for his presentation this morning. As he said, he traveled from Halifax, having just been in Halifax, and now here he's in demand across the country. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to be here with us, and he actually sat through all of the sessions yesterday as well, so we really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.